Having a good weekend. I wanted to continue chapter 2 of Genesis. I know last time I did not really give much of an introduction. I just sort of jumped right in. So I wanted to give a introduction on who I am and why I started to jump into this. So my name is Donnie. Live in Baltimore, Maryland. I was in yeshiva growing up. I learned these texts, Tanakh, the Chumash, as in elementary school growing up. We went through the verses, and as I got older and continued in yeshiva, when I got to about seventh grade, about the age of when you get bar mitzvah at around 13, the primary focus became learning the Talmud, learning Gemara, and that became the main the primary text that we studied, and it stayed that way till I was in yeshiva from those middle school years all the way until I was 23 and 24, and we primarily would be studying the Talmud for most of the day, and the focus on Tanakh, on the Torah, became a bit more in the background. There is obviously in all synagogues there's a Torah reading every weekly, so it wasn't something that was on my mind at all. But the primary focus was the Talmud, and that's why I want to try to revisit these texts again more seriously. Hi, Chezi. It's really good to see you. Hey, Paul. Thanks so much for joining. I appreciate it. Another thing that's... Hi, Lynn. Good morning. Another thing that's just really amazing about these texts for me is it really is inexhaustible, and every time I look at them, I see different things that I haven't seen before. Even just the simple reading of it, not getting deep into the text, just the simple reading of it, it's always astonishing that it never ends, how you can break it down and how much you can learn from it. But I also find that it's the book that I come to when I don't have direction, I don't know what to do next in life, and somehow you can come back to these texts, and it's just always a light providing you to... It's just in some ways I find that when I study, I think I just lost my video for some reason. Don't know why that happened. Give me 1 second. Oh, I'm back. For some reason, I find that when I study that I find the intersection between prayer and the text and learning, because in growing up I was taught that there's learning and there's prayer. And I find that when I learn, it intersects with prayer, because I feel like you have to have faith, and you have to, the text have to somehow come through you in some sort of prayer in order to actually reach that understanding. The Bible is a must. We must return to read them through the eyes of the prophets, aka Kabbalah. I agree very much. With that in mind, I will start reading chapter 2. I hope to do one chapter each time, and then I'll drop the link. If someone wants to join, we can chat about it for a bit. I don't plan on keeping these longer than half hour or hour, depending on if the conversation is generated through it. Okay, chapter 2. And God finished the creation of the heaven and the earth. Vaychal Elokim bayom hashvi melachto asher asa, and God finished on the seventh day all the work that he completed. Vayishbos bayom hashvi, he rested on the seventh day, mikol achto asher asa, from all the work that he did. This verse seems very repetitive, but the theme here is that God finished his job and he rested on the seventh day. Vayivarach Elokim es yom hashvi, and God blessed the seventh day. Vayikadesh aso, and he made it holy, he made it sacred. Kivo Shavas Mikom Malachto, because again, this is the day that he finished his work. Asher bara Elokim lasos. It's interesting that this is the first mentions of Shabbos, of the Shabbos in the Torah, and it doesn't really give so many descriptions of it. More that God rested and that God made it holy. You would think this is in the Jewish tradition. This is the reason, the whole purpose of why the world was created was for the Shabbos, and doesn't really give that much of a description. Chazi, since then we are still in the seventh day. I'm not sure I know exactly what that means, but that sounds very esoteric. It's not the first time it's mentioned. This is not the first time. I don't know. I don't know what you're referencing in parentheses there. Is that already in chapter 1 of Genesis? I wasn't aware of that. And hi, good morning, RJ. It's good to see you. So again, it doesn't really give much of a description, more that God rested, and maybe that's all the description that's necessary here, I guess, is that the resting creates the holiness somehow. Moving on to verse 4, Eila told us Hashemayim v'aretz b'hibaram. This is the story of God creating the heaven and the earth. B'yom osas Hashem Elokim eretz v'shemayim. And when God created the heaven and the earth, chol siach hasada terem yeh ba'aretz, the stuff that was planted, the chol yisrael hasada terem yitzmach, all the grass and plants that were created didn't actually come forth. Ki lo himter Hashem Elokim al aretz, because God did not bring rain to the earth. Adam ayin la'avodas dama, and man was not there to serve to actually work on the field. So I guess this is the first time in the Torah where have this hint of the partnership between God and man, that you need to have for the world to produce properly. You need to have that combination of God bringing the rain, but you also have to have man in a partnership with God to bring forth the soil. Chazi, definitely do not be quiet. I enjoy all your comments. The resting is the invention to complete the seventh day so we could reach the eighth day. The temple is an eighth day element in this world. Okay, very interesting. So the eighth day is like what we say, like Lamala Min HaTeva, like it's above the standard nature. Okay, moving into verse 6. And the rain came down, and it provided irrigation to the entire earth. And then the next pasuk is getting back into the creation of man. Vayitzar Hashem Elokim es ha'adam afar min adama, and God formed man from the dust of the earth. Vayipach ba'apav neshos chayim, and he blew into him the soul. Vayiyana adam lenefesh chaya, and the man became a living being. I appreciate here that this kind of paradox, that man was created from dirt, and God blew into him this neshama, the soul. Obviously, I think that's purposeful irony, that we have this paradox come together: the dirt, which is obviously the lowest of earth, and the soul of that comes from God. I think this sets a pretty good standard in the Torah of how there's so much irony, and it's almost comedic in a sense, and how how the gap between obviously dirt and dust and the soul. Vayita Hashem Elokim Gan Eden mikedem, and God planted Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. Vayasem Sham es Adam asher yatzar, and he placed man there that he created. Vayitzmach Hashem Elokim el Adama, and God planted in the Garden of Eden, Kol Eitz Nechmad Lamara V'Tov Lamachal, all the beautiful trees to look at, and also that are delightful to eat. V'Eitz HaChaim B'Soch HaGan, and he put the tree of life inside the garden. V'Eitz HaDas Tovara, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The Nar Yotze Me'eden, this gets into like a bit of a description of the Garden of Eden. Not sure I understand what any of these following verses mean. The Nar Yotze Me'eden L'Hashkas Hagan, and the river of Eden that went to water the garden, Umisham Yifarid, and from there it divided, Vayla Arba Roshim, and this river had 4 different branches. And this is going to list all the branches of the river. Shema Echad Pishon, one of them was Pishon. Hasovi is called Aretz Chavila, that surrounded the entire land of Chavila, Asher Samazav, where there was apparently gold in that area. Uzav Aretz Hahi Tov, and the gold of that land was good. Sham Habadalech Evan Hasham, and there was also 2 different types of stones that were found there. Hashem Anar Hasheni Gichon, and then there was another river called Gichon. Hu Hasovi is called Aretz Kush, that was surrounded the land of Cush. V'shem Hanar Shlishi Chidekel, and the third river was called Chidekel, Hu Aholech Kidmas Ashur, the one that flows to the east of Ashur. V'anar Avihu Paras, and the 4th river was Paras. So I don't know really what any of those verses are speaking about, to be honest. So I'm just going to read those plainly, translating it. Let's see if I want to catch up on some comments here. I like how this in part implies Adam's role. Yes, I agree. As I think the establishment of creation via separation. Yes, very much. I believe in a soul as compared to non-dualists who believe in consciousness. I cannot claim to know exactly what that means. The 4 rivers, they can never figure out where one is supposed to be. Yes, indeed. Too much to comment about. Yes, Chazi, this is some hard material that we're going through, I guess. This is the beginning of it all. Okay. Vayikach Hashem Elokim es Adam, and God took Adam and he put him in Gan Eden le'avda u'lishamra, to serve it and to protect it. I was thinking about this morning before I jumped on here. This is the one verse that caught my eye before I started. I don't know if I ever thought about this verse, that, everyone always asks, like, why, at least when I was in yeshiva, it was a question that was always spoken about, like, why are we created? Like, what's our purpose in this world? And I never noticed that it actually says it in this verse, apparently. It says God put man in Eden. Why? La'avda u'lishamra, to serve it and to protect it. So I feel like this is the first description of man's purpose. We're here to serve, and we're here to protect. I'm not sure what I want to do with that, or what to take away from that, but I think it's interesting to analyze those 2 words, and just something that came to mind this morning. Vayitzav Hashem Elokim al Adam Lemar, and God gave his first commandment to man. Mikol eitz hagan ochel tocha, you can eat from all the trees, but u'meitz hatas tovara, but from the tree of good and bad, lo socha, you cannot eat from it. Ki b'yom achalta mimenu mos tamas, because the day you eat from that, you will surely die. So this is the first command that man receives, and then the verse says, "Vayomer Hashem Elokim lo tov hayos adam levado." It's not good for man to be alone. As lo ezer kenegdo, there should be a ezer kenegdo, which means a helper, kenegdo, opposite him. This is again another, I think, ironic part of the Torah here, where Adam has one directive, and the directive is, do not eat from the tree of the good and evil. But then the next verse says, oh, it's not good for man to be alone. Man needs to have a partner. And obviously, we know that Eve was the one that caused Adam to sin. So it's interesting that after God gives Adam this directive, he then brings up the idea of bringing Chava into the world, and which obviously was the one is how Adam actually sinned. Another point is that this term Ezer Kenegdo means a helper opposite him, which is a very weird expression. So Chazi's bringing up a point of processing as the interpretation there. I really like the more bleak interpretation of it. I think Rashi says this interpretation, it's from the Talmud, that if it's basically saying a double translation. If you're lucky to have an Ezer, meaning if you're lucky to have a helper, then your helper will be a source of support through your life. But if you're not lucky, then Kenegdo, your entire life, you're going to be dealing with someone who opposes you in the negative sense. So that's how the Talmud, that's one of the interpretations of the Talmud, and that Ezer Kenegdo is actually a blessing or a curse, depending how you select your spouse. Verse 19. Vayitzar Hashem Elokim and Adam kol chayes hasadeh veis kol of hashemayim, and God formed all the animals and all of the birds. Vayave el Adam l'eros mayikrlo, and he brought man to say to name them. V'chol asher yikrlo Adam nefesh chai hu shemo, and anybody and all the animals that he named maintained that name. Vayikra Adam shemos l'chol behema l'chol shemayim. He named all the animals. Adam lo matza ezer kenegdo, but man was not able to find this mate. So what happens next is Vayapel Hashem Elokim Tardema al Adam Vayishan, and God put man into a slumber. Vayishan vayikach achas me'asalosav, and he took one of his ribs. Vayiskar basar tachtena, and he then closed it up. Vayiven Hashem Elokim asasela shelach adam l'isha, and God took this part of man and created a woman. Vayiva al adam, and he brought the woman to the man. I don't think this is my insight. I forgot where I heard this from, but I think this is, it's interesting that man has to fall asleep. And this is maybe the first source for that man has to fall in love, because he actually had to be put to sleep before meeting Chava. So maybe that's a source for falling in love. Vayomer Adam Zos. This is about to complete the chapter here. Vayomer Adam Hazos Hapam Etzem Atzamai. That man said, "This is the bone of my bones, ubasar bibsari, and the flesh of my flesh. Lizos yikara isha, and for this I will call her woman. Kime ish lekochazos, because from man she was taken." I don't think I ever really meditated on this phrase, etzem me'atzamai ubasar mibsari, that she is the bones from my bones and the flesh from my flesh. Really interesting language here. Al ken yazov ish as aviv, therefore a man should leave as his parents, v'davek be'ishto, and he should connect with his wife, vayil basar echad, and there'll be one flesh. Vayush, this is the final verse, vayush ne arumim ha'adam ve'ishto, and both of Adam and Chava were naked, the lo yisbosheshu, and they felt no shame. Okay, that is the second chapter. Now I'm going to drop the link and see if anyone wants to join. I just have to figure out how to do that. Okay, here we go. Going through this, it's much harder to translate all this out loud and to break it down. when you start looking and seeing how complex all this is. I would definitely want to hear people's thoughts on this chapter, questions, comments. I'm not sure what I want to do with this phrase, etzem me'atzamai ubasar ibsari. If someone has an interpretation of that is it just as simple that Adam is saying that this is like me, that this is a creature unlike the animals? Is it as simple as that? I'm not sure. And then also after that verse of when he finally finds man, when he finally finds Chava, he finds Eve, then the verse says, therefore, every man needs to leave his parents and connect with his wife. Why does that come up here? It also just seems very random to put that into the second chapter of Genesis. Okay, RJ said he's gonna hop on. Awesome. I think also verse 24 is, it seems like a directive for like future generations, essentially, and how a person should live his life when they get married. It just seems out of place in this chapter. Yes, that's the most important decision, they say. I'm single, so I wouldn't know, but that's what I'm told. She helps by challenging him. Yes, but Chazi, do you at least agree that the Talmud has a more bleak interpretation of that phrase? Meaning, I appreciate the way you're interpreting it too, and those are good interpretations also. But I think the Talmud is very straightforward when it says that if you're not zocha, if you don't merit. Oh, RJ just joined.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going? Did I add you? Let me change my.
I'm not sure yet, but I'm still checking some settings here.
Oh, here you are.
How's my mic?
Your mic is good.
Fantastic.
How's it going this morning?
Pretty good, pretty good. I woke up thinking it was Saturday for some reason.
Oh, happy Sunday.
Here we are. Yep.
Yeah.
But I was appreciating your read through, had a couple of thoughts in the comments, and happy to chit chat. Also, us East Coasterners we got to hold down the fort, Got to let them know that we're still studying.
Absolutely. People don't know that me and RJ actually live in the same town. So we're actually,
Well, my grandparents are from your area.
We don't. I thought you're. Oh, okay, you're not. But we're close enough, though, right?
Yeah, we're close enough.
You're in Maryland.
Yeah, the DMV, Delaware down to Virginia is a whole one place anyway.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. Like, everybody thinks all the kids out there are just schmoes, not studying, not reading. But yeah, I really liked your pickup on, I forget which specific line it is, but it's usually put in English as to till the soil.
Yeah.
And how you pointed out how it's actually to serve and to protect. I think that's a pretty interesting just kind of set up within the chapter. And especially since the chapter obviously follows Bereshis. And so we're kind of getting, the creation of of man's world from maybe his perspective, as opposed to the creation of the world from, Hashem's perspective, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
So that when I someone pointed that out to me one day, and that's always helped it click a little bit more as to why it's, others will refer to it as a second creation story. I don't see it that way, but I like how it's kind of fractaling down, as it were.
What does that mean? A second creation story? What can you explain what that
Oh,
means?
academics will straight up call chapter 2 a separate creation story of the world
Oh,
from that of
interesting.
chapter 1. Yeah.
Okay, I did not know that. Oh, you're saying starting, okay, because it sort of like goes back and says this is the story of God creating the earth, and then it talks about the rain and the ground. So you're saying that's like a part 2.
Yeah, you could say it's like a part 2. I think there's like a perspective switch, like I mentioned, that's pretty important there, but that's just kind of how I tend to see it. I am no rabbi by any means, but just an admirer of the text. But
Once you're on YouTube, you're automatically a rabbi. That's the beauty
oh,
of it.
that's so true, man.
Yeah,
Someone's gonna find this and think we're both rabbis. That's true.
yeah, yeah. Um, let's see. Chazi at Semas was like very deep. Yeah, it's funny when I read it out loud. I was like, this sounds like something that's something to think about. Chazal deal with this as well. Yeah, I'll have to go deeper into it. Lynn says, I think it means to be kind to those who push you. She's talking about the Azer Conegdo.
Hmm.
Yeah. What do you think about that, RJ? About the Azer Conegdo? About the it literally means the helper that's opposite you.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about that on and off for a little while, and I mentioned one comment while we were still reading that given the wiggle room you can take with translation, would put that in English as besides him, not in the sense of his like the help meet or the opposer,
Got it.
because the person who walks besides you can hold you back or push you forward in that sense.
Okay.
And thinking about it from like a little bit more of like a abstract or artistic way, it's he's even taken out of Eve is even taken out of Adam's side. In the Hebrew, there's a whole pun about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I couldn't do it justice, but it's like she was called, I think it's Chava, because she was, or I'm doing it wrong, but in the Hebrew it says she's taken out of man
Right.
because you actually take the letter off. So that's a
Okay.
pun. That's like a bit of a pun. But I don't use that to say like, oh, this means that she can't be the traditionally understood helpmeet or opposer.
Right.
I just tend to think of it as in the same way that God separates these different things and establishes more in the first chapter. He's again separating out and creating more. Like there's more of a relationship now. And then I would feel remiss if I didn't probably make Hezy's point that in the Kabbalah, I think somewhere, there's the whole concept of or it's not Adam Kadmon, but like Adam was originally both Adam and Eve, and then they were separated.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So there's more of that happening, and there's that's the continuity I see all the way down through Noah. But
Mm-hmm.
so those are just some of my thoughts. I like these openings a lot. So
Awesome. Yeah, that's something I did not mention is the is that other take. It's an argument in the Talmud about whether or not they were created separately or they're created together. I forgot where that debate is, but that is another interesting point here that they're actually created together. Obviously, that would go very well with, I forgot which day of creation it was. I think it's the sixth day where it says that Vayivra Elokim es Adam B'Tzalmo B'Tzalmo Kim Baraso Zachar Unekeva Barosam. Like it says already in the chapter 1, the 6th day, that God created man as a male and female. So that goes very well with that interpretation, that they were created together and then separated later on.
Yeah, I try to stick with things that if it agrees with it, then then it's kind of an okay place to stand. Like, I
Sure.
don't view my interpretation that I shared a moment ago as like being completely outside of those things. So happy to talk
Sure.
about them.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
that's the name of the game. What's too far and what's not. What's inside the garden, what's not.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think about this idea of, the purpose of the world is to serve and to protect? What is that? What's your first association when you say those words?
There's a bit of tikkun olam in that. There's a bit of the recobbling together of the sparks in that. But what it's a tough question, Donnie. I think it's defining part of man's function, um, in a sense. I'm gonna reach outside for just a brief moment and point at how other people have interpreted things. I'm thinking of what was it? I think it might be Mathieu Pajot, who points to some of this as well as kind of the that having the two functions itself is what is important, and that just like Adam and Eve, they can be one greater thing, but they're specialized in two different ways. So like the serving of the land and Adam's mastery over the animals comes with his obligation to protect them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the till the soil and to tend the garden, in the sense, carries that same kind of relationship. So if you're caring for the land and then pulling it back when it's overgrown or becomes too wild, then those are the two kind of functions. It's almost a left brain, right brain kind of dynamic.
Okay.
But they like but that is what Adam does. Or that is what, and again, because Adam can mean in this case humanity, in a sense,
Sure.
that is what humanity does. Because again, it's not until the next chapter, which I guess hopefully we'll be going over next week, we start to see the creation of family and family dynamics and peoples plural. But so for right now, I tend to see this as just talking about the human being, and what we do in the world. We serve and protect others, as well as help and support and challenge others. So that's what
Yeah.
I see there.
Well said. Yeah, I mean, I think my first, I guess, association is just the first word of love, that to serve. Um, I think it's for me, it's easy to forget that that is the purpose is to be in service of others. I know it's like some would argue that's the whole purpose of the Torah and what it's trying to tell us. But sometimes it's easy to forget. It's easy to get caught up in um, all the different, especially in the world we live in, which is so I guess materialistic, and it's also so egocentric, and um, it's hard to remember this piece that the purpose is love, to serve others, especially because that word, that word of the to serve others is also the same phrase we use for slavery.
Hmm.
Like we call someone who is a slave an eved, and if you think about it from that perspective, it's the same word. Someone being a slave, which these days is obviously completely
It's very different in English, right? Because we're so used to thinking of chattel slavery.
Correct, true, but it's at the same time the any kind of servant is not something that's. I mean, I guess you could view a lot of things as being a servant. That's not slavery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Technically.
But I think we see that very clearly when Abraham pledges service to the Lord. You could say in English, but that's skipping ahead in the book. Don't do that.
Right.
Bad RJ.
But that's sort of the question is like, should we be, is it a problem to call like, to serve as slavery? Meaning, and I'm not saying it in the sense of, I'm not saying it in the sense of, that I'm trying to make it that, oh, this is a terrible thing to become an Evan, to become a slave of God. I'm just trying to understand in terms of like the perspective of how non-egocentric service of God needs to be, where it's to the level of an Evan, to the level of sorts.
Right, where your, I was gonna say will, but that doesn't really capture it, and would say the wrong thing actually. But where your personage is fully not only devoted, but almost at one in the sense of fully following the other.
Exactly.
Like you are, and this is, I'm no Hebrew expert, but it seems to be kind of, you could think about it if you're trying to teach someone Hebrew in English. It's someone who is fully toward the other person.
Exactly, and that's what.
And in that sense, they become bound together.
Right, and that's what Jan God's saying here. Slave and servants can't do what they want; they follow direction. Yeah, exactly that's what we're talking about.
Right. Well, that's the kind of slavery that we tend to think of, but may not be the kind of service or being bound that we'll see in Genesis. That's maybe more along the lines that we see in Exodus.
Interesting. What's the differentiation there? And good morning, Jan God, and good morning, Yoav. We are not lovers. We are romantics. We are here to serve you. Different face, but the words never change. We are here to serve you. A different face, but the words never change. Interesting.
Gary Newman.
Okay, so what's the difference between Exodus and Genesis in terms of the servitude, RJ?
In my mind, there is an act of agreement, so to speak, that occurs, that when you break down some of what happens across Abraham's life, but it's more at his earlier encounters with the Lord, he begins the covenant, and I tend to also include in my thinking some of the cultural context that we've conjectured or rediscovered about the area of Mesopotamia, where it's suzerainty, not in the same sense of like a king. So maybe we would think of this as like having a banner lord in feudal times, where it's like you're pledging yourself to them in exchange for something. And in this case, it's that kind of service, that kind of being an Adar to someone. Whereas when we get to the opening of Exodus, it talks about how if you read between the lines a little bit, you can kind of see as like the people have been reduced into bondage.
Okay.
So it's a difference between the act of like wanting to follow someone or something, and if it's not a healthy relationship, then that can reduce one side into being at the full direction of another person.
Got it. When there's when there's no more autonomy at all, right?
Yeah, I mean, it says in Exodus that they were taskmasters set over them. So that is the removal of agency at a certain level.
Right.
And that is very different than the pledges of service we see that usually accompany things like sacrifice or the naming of some place amongst the patriarchs.
Right. Interesting. I think that's a great point. Like when you get once you start edging close to lack of agency, then at some point, the service is not, I guess, as meaningful at that point. Unless I'm just thinking of like stories of like super righteous people like the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Like I guess they used their agency to completely and made it completely devoted to God, and it was like their decision. You know what I mean? Meaning, I think righteous people are able to somehow still use their agency, but then be completely devoted to God. And as much as it seems like they almost have no agency anymore because their agency is captured by God completely.
Well, I'd point out that have you ever heard the phrase of choosing to become chosen?
No.
Well, it's kind of in that phrasing of it that reflects what you're saying, I think.
Right.
I mean, it's definitely not my phrase. I'm pretty sure I picked it up from an internet rabbi somewhere. He may have
Yeah.
actually been a rabbi, but yeah, the idea is that they are choosing to become in this relationship. They are choosing to be God's chosen,
Right.
and then that definitely fits into the event at Sinai with the revelation of the name. I think because
Mhm.
it's working at a larger level of scale. So like Genesis is very much about the family. Exodus becomes about as a people. That continues to expand out all the way down through Kings and stuff.
Fascinating. Well, we're gonna get there. I'm gonna be doing a
I
chapter
hope so.
today. Before you know it, I'll be at Kings.
Yeah. But was there anything that stuck out to you about chapter 2? I'm curious.
Um, I mean, my favorite part, I tell people like sometimes ask me, like, how do I know that the Torah is true? How do I know it's a document that it's something to pay attention to? And something I always tell people is I know the Torah is true because it makes absolutely no sense. Literally, no part of it makes any sense. And I love that about it. That every time I read it, it's such a mystery. Um, and this is another chapter where I'm just like, I have no idea what's happening. And I think it's that itself is such a gift, I think. I mean, some people could view that as being frustrating or annoying that it seems so mysterious. But for me, it's so exciting every time to read it and be like, what is actually going on here? This is so bizarre. Um, so I think one of the things I'm thinking about is, first of all, to start the chapter, you mentioned this, RJ, about like it seems like creation 2.0, like another, like he had the first 7 days, and then he restarts it, which is interesting. And I think what I mentioned earlier about God giving this directive about not eating from the tree, but then the next verse he creates the woman, which leads Adam to eat from the tree, is interesting. It's almost as if God wants Adam to eat from the tree. It would almost, I think that would be heretical to say, but that's how it almost feels when after he gives him that directive, he then creates Eve, who then leads him to actually sin. Um, and at the same time, Eve is hailed as this human that's going to complete Adam, right? But she again is the one that leads him to sin. Um, so I think just that irony is so interesting. The other thing I also want to mention is that Eve is still not named at this point, which is interesting. She still has no name even though
Right. She's woman. They're being treated as woman and man, and then in the next piece we'll find that how their names and yeah.
right. But Adam already has a name though. Adam is called Adam already at this point.
Well, there's a question in there is if you're just alone in a forest, you know, what's your name, you know?
Right.
So like I'm kind of pointing out that it'll take on something new as a name once Eve is named.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
But I always enjoy the conversations and questions around like, well, why did he even make the tree? Why was it even there? Was it for the directive? And it's all
Sure, for sure. It reminds me of this scene that I always appreciated in Lion King, where it's the original one. Like I think the first few minutes of the movie where Mufasa, Simba's dad, the king, he brings he's like teaching Simba the lay of the land, and he brings him to the edge of the rock, and he shows him the
right. Yes, exactly.
Right? And he says to him, "You can have everything except where I forgot the line he says, like where the."
Oh, I could quote it for you, but I won't.
Please quote it. I love it, Lion King nerd. Please.
Oh, so it's everything the light touches, and then Simba notices that. What about that little shadowy part? And he says,
Yes.
"You must never go. That is beyond the Pride Land, Simba. You must never go there."
Yes, exactly. And I think I feel like that scene is so reminiscent. It's the same scene as Genesis.
That's a great connection. Yeah.
It's like God is almost like saying like, don't touch this one tree. You can have it all. You can have everything. Just not that one tree. And then he creates, Chava to sort of lead him to it. It seems, like it's almost happening for that purpose for him to sin.
Well, see, you got my mind on Disney and how the same kind of pattern of chapter 2 can be represented artistically. And I'm seeing it even in the opening of The Lion King. It shows the sun and the water and the air being split, and then it moves through all the creatures of the land until it gets to Simba being presented.
Sure.
Which is, you could say that same narrative is a similar narrative structure. And then that made me think of Prince of Egypt I think that's a DreamWorks movie. The way that when Moses is going through the water in the opening scenes, how they also show the land and the water and the Leviathans and things. So just kind of thinking about, not just looking at the words, but what the words are standing in for and reflecting can be a very powerful and important thing to understand what's being outlaid.
Sure. Yeah. Yoav says, love is the plan is death. And he linked a Wikipedia link, so I have to look that up. Cassandra, good morning. The call to adventure is in the prohibition. The call to adventure is in the prohibition. I have to think about that.
Well, I would think that's definitely in The Lion King. But there's definitely a lot of questions as if the tree of life and good and evil is a call to adventure. But
right. My only question to Cassandra about this idea is that does that mean we can't? Do you always have to have that barrier in order to become great? Is that how the world has to be? It seems like that it is, that if you don't have that stumbling block in front of you, if you don't have that hurdle to jump over, then you can't really transcend for some reason. But it's just something I wonder, wouldn't the world be a better place if we didn't need the roadblocks to make ourselves great, and we could just somehow motivate ourselves to be great for the sake of it. But I don't know. Maybe that's a paradox what I'm saying, because
I'd push back a little bit on that, kind of pointing back to the way the text functions from what I'm picking up on, which is that the boundaries between things are important. You know, the separation of the things, that makes it a boundary between them. So you don't want to just go collapsing boundaries in the name of overcoming. I don't see that here in the story, but
what does that
I
mean?
can see what she's pointing out.
What does that mean, collapsing? What does that mean, collapsing about? You're saying you don't want to just violate commandments in order to become greater. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's definitely a good way of reading it in this context.
Interesting. Right, but you could take what Cassandra's saying in a broader piece, where you have to sort of have something blocking you in order to become great. Like, you see lots of people who, I don't know, are very wealthy, or they're become scholars, or they're very high up in various hierarchies, and you hear their story, and they went through something really difficult, as a child. Maybe they lost a parent, and somehow that actually galvanized them to greatness in many instances.
For sure. I would make the distinction, though, that they're overcoming adversity and not overcoming a boundary, in the sense of, like, that which is, they're not rejecting how the world works. In fact, when they overcome that way, they're actually moving more with how the world works. They're not kind of like, to bring it back to the text here. It's not like to become great means to undo anything that we saw in this chapter, or to make it so that it's different. Like, you have to work with how things are.
Right, but you could be playful about this word prohibition here, right? Because essentially, when someone is dealt a really bad a hand of cards, and essentially it is a prohibition. It's they're being told you can't do X, Y, Z, and then they overcome that prohibition. Like, you could be playful in that sense as well. And I think it's similar to when someone tells you don't do this, because of whether it's for godly reasons or arbitrary reasons. Adam and Eve didn't have adversity until they ate the fruit. Right.
So that's what catches my attention when chapter 2 ends with saying how they are naked.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that ending of the chapter. To say more about that.
Well, I think it's setting up for chapter 3, when they're no longer, when they become clothed, so to speak. But thinking about it a little bit more, chapter 2 seems to be about, like, the nakedness of that experience of being a person.
Right.
Before you're thinking about, the things that you as an individual, as a person, like to do, and how you're different than your brothers and your sisters or whoever. This chapter 2 points out that, we are all this. Like, trees are the same for all of us. The day-night cycle is the same for all of us. So everything has just been about kind of the human experience still, and how we're naked and almost vulnerable to that in a way. And maybe that puts chapter 3 in a different light. I've got, like, about a half an hour. I don't know if you want to take a look at chapter 3, since it's shorter. We keep talking about it, but
I actually have to run in a couple of minutes. I want to, I was going to end this in, like, probably, like, when we hit the hour mark, so I have like 5 minutes to go.
No problem.
But I do want to mention also the end of that verse that you just brought up. It says the end of it is Velo Yisposhishu, and they were not embarrassed. They had no shame. And I think it just hit me as you were speaking, RJ, that is this the first human emotion mentioned in the Torah? or did we mention one before? I think this is the first one. Shame. Like, is there another one that
No,
we missed?
I would be very surprised. I don't think so.
So I feel like that's something to think about as well. You know, the first human emotion in the Torah is shame. Especially, you know, I know culturally, and at least like in trendy psychology, shame is a very big topic right now and how it impacts people. So it is interesting that this is the first mention of it.
Well, I think the way that it's phrased is also interesting because it's that they were naked, and then as a caveat to that, almost like they were naked and they were not feeling shame or ashamed of anything to be naked. So I think it's also still keying in on, you know, how things were at that time. It's definitely interesting that shame as an emotion is mentioned so early, but what I'm really saying is it's even more interesting to me how they're not feeling it and how
Right.
that seems to be the thing that they're pointing out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yoav said, no heavenly statements ever go without as much of a fig leaf anywhere, anytime. They were not human yet. That's an interesting way of looking at it. They weren't human yet. Interesting. I don't think I would have thought of it that way. Interesting. Okay. This was really fun. I think I'm going to end the stream. Thanks everyone for joining. RJ, we're gonna have to meet up in the real world soon.
It sounds good.
Let's do it. Text me.
Will do.
Awesome.
All right.
And
Shalom, shalom, everyone.
Thanks so much for joining, RJ. I really appreciate you joining the conversation.
Looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.